and there's lots to get on with. Robert Taylor, political commentator, joins us. Afternoon to you, Robert.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. What an interesting week, certainly in the world of geopolitics. I mean, it doesn't really get any more tantalising than the feast we've had laid out over the last few days.
I quite agree. I assume you're talking about Donald Trump and not Kemi Badenoch, or maybe both.
There may have been a both there, I suppose.
It's certainly been a big week for politics on both sides of the Atlantic.
Indeed. And it's interesting that David Lamy, you mentioned Kemi Badenoch, there is a nice bridge between those two stories, of course, because Kemi Badenoch, her first PMQs, I thought she was a little nervous, if I'm honest, during that. I'm sure she'll fall into the role. But one of the things she challenged was to try and get Keir Starmer to apologise on behalf of David Lamy for previous comments he'd made about Donald Trump, calling him a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, which is pretty brutal stuff. But David Lamy has now spoken out on this and said it's old news and there's nothing to see here. He said, in fact, he met with Trump recently, described him as gracious, generous and warm about the UK and the royal family. And in fact, he even offered Mr. Lamy a second portion of chicken.
Well,
I'm surprised Lamy didn't say that's a bit racist, but that's a whole other story.
Well, look, I mean, I think David Lamy should have fronted up on this one, just been honest and said, look, back in 2017, I went over the top. I think it was around 2017, 2018 when he said that. He should have said, I went over the top. I went far too far in my language. I regret it. It was silly. And now we need to take things forward. But just sort of dodging the issue, to be frank, that's what David Lamy has done by saying it's old news. I don't think fills me with, it doesn't give me the greatest respect for him. I think honesty is the best policy when you've been found with your hand in the biscuit tin, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I did hear Pat McFadden, of course, a head honcho now in Downing Street, Labour MP, being questioned on whether he believed that Mr. Trump was a KKK-supporting sociopath, and he wouldn't deny it. He didn't say he was, but he wouldn't say he wasn't. And I thought that was rather interesting. And it might be, I don't know how you're meant to do it diplomatically. Lamy is now the Foreign Secretary. Could he have said, do you know what? Yeah, he's not my cup of tea, to be honest. He's got a different flavour of politics. I don't like the way he conducts himself, but this is business and we will deal with him. Is that even possible when you're in that position? Yeah,
it is possible. I mean, we had John Major and Bill Clinton. That wasn't the best of relationships, but did okay. Obviously, Tony Blair and George Bush was the famous one. Yeah. David Cameron, Obama. You can be on opposite sides. You don't necessarily agree with each other to be able to have a decent relationship. That's obviously what Starmer wants. But why then appoint someone as Foreign Secretary just months before you know that Donald Trump could be the next president, knowing that Foreign Secretary has said the most awful things? I don't think it sort of reflects terribly well on Starmer, quite frankly.
Yeah, fair point. Let's go. There's a couple of stories around the Mayor of London today, and here's another one which we haven't mentioned so far. I think Alex alluded to it a little earlier. The London Assembly are urging the Mayor to support asylum seekers with public transport costs, which are currently unaffordable on their current allowance. Asylum seekers receive around about £8.86 a week for non-food costs, which means travelling to appointments and essential services are somewhat hindered. The Home Office only funds travel for mandatory appointments, which leaves asylum seekers unable to access vital services, says this body. This is a motion that's supported by 15 votes, driven by Citizens UK's advocacy for better access to transport for asylum seekers. Now, I don't want to sound unkind to somebody who may require help, but I think there's probably quite a lot of people who live on the breadline who also can't afford to jump on buses and tubes on a regular basis.
Yeah, well, that is exactly right. And this is a classic case of the London Assembly being kind to be cruel. And it is that way round, because all this does is for me, it adds to the incentives for people to risk their lives coming across the channel. And we know that, something like 50 people have died this year or drowned, including, very young children. I can't remember the exact number. And for me, the reason is because we keep saying to them, you're welcome here, come across, you can have all these benefits. And it sounds terribly harsh to say that the London Assembly is wrong, but it's bit by bit, we're encouraging people to make that absolutely treacherous journey, which means they're risking their lives. Just one more thing on that, Ian. The press release, I understand, from the London Assembly saying that these people are often fleeing violence or persecution. Look, they're fleeing France. They're fleeing the EU to come to the UK.
Yes,
that's
ultimately,
not violence and persecution.
Ultimately, that is just a demonstrable fact, and there's no way around that. Here's another story, which is a bit bats, because it's about bats. HS2 apparently going to spend £100 million on a shed to protect bats in a wood. It's a special sort of bat protection structure. This is in the Buckinghamshire area. In order to protect bats, apparently there's no evidence that trains harm the bats, but the structure is designed to allow bats to safely cross above the railway, which runs for around about 1 kilometre next to some woods. So it means they go kind of over rather than into a train. Now, look, I love a bat. You don't see bats very often. You don't see bats like you see rabbits or foxes, right? In fact, when you do see a bat, it's like seeing an A-list celebrity, isn't it? It's like, there's a bat, look! And it's gone before you've realised what it is. But when you spot one, it's a lovely little moment, and you don't get much of a moment because they're soon there and gone. As much as I love a little bat, 100 million quid, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, and if anyone ever wanted to know why we've got sky-high tax with no improvement in public services, this is the perfect demonstration of why that's happening. And what we've also got here is we've got two competing sort of woke progressive causes going against each other. We've got the desire for ever more immigration on the one hand, which means more housing, more infrastructure, more need for HS2. And on the other hand, you've got the woke cause of protecting the environment, of countless interest groups with their own rights that they want taken into consideration. So you get this clash between the two woke causes. Apparently, there have been 8,000 consents that HS2 has had to negotiate to get it working between London and Birmingham. 8,000! Wow. And that combustion between these two woke causes leads to 100 million quid of taxpayers' money just on a Batshed.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's always going to be a debate, isn't it, about, environmental things. I think I'm right in saying that years ago, Brands Hatch racing circuit was unable to extend itself. The Grand Prix and the like is always at Silverstone, not at Brands Hatch, and I think there's reasons for that. But the reason I'm sure that Brands Hatch couldn't be extended was something to do with some newts, or, some, I don't know, a pigeon or something. There was some kind of nature-based reason that if you dug there to put, a new kind of hairpin bend in, you were somehow going to disrupt a cavern of crows or whatever it was. It was,
yeah. This is how mad. I'm all for protecting the green belt. I'm all for protecting our beautiful countryside, our ancient woodland.
Yeah.
I'm all for that. Actually, more on the side of Nature England, or whatever it's called, the body that's putting this campaign.
Bats aren't going to die out, right?
Yeah, I mean, that matters to me. But it's this clash of left-wing progressive causes, and I would just say you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
And the taxpayer suffers as a result.
And I would imagine evolutionary that the bat would get used to the idea that there is, a hazard there, so we will kind of swerve the hazard. It's quite clever, the old bats, aren't they? I mean, they can pick up I don't know what they eat even. What do they eat? Beetles or something? But they can fly around a cave, and they've got this sort of, amazing kind of antenna thing, this sort of radar, where they're able to, through a series of echoes and the like, realise where there's something around. Fly through a cave, OK, but apparently a train is going to scupper the bat. I don't think so. I think the bat will know exactly where the train is. I bet it's got its own mental timetable of the thing.
And I think that's what Nature England has actually said, that there is no evidence, or that there's been some suggestion. There is no evidence the bats are going to be affected by this, but still the taxpayer has been stung for 100 million quid. Couldn't make it up.
And you couldn't make this one up as well. This is the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. I never thought I'd read a story like that. They face criticism after issuing an exam question. They set a scenario out for people taking the exam, and the scenario was essentially to imagine... the exam question described a festival in a fictitious country with a band named Nova, and it was resembling October the 7th. And, of course, what happened there. I have at what point, bearing in mind when they do exam questions and they set exam questions and scenarios, you might imagine that there's a sort of a quality control in that world where you write the questions, then you give it to sort of your peers and they go, is that question all right? Is that a good one? And someone's come up, here's a question, I've got a scenario, you've got to imagine a fictitious country with a band named Nova and tragic events going. I mean, it beggars belief that someone didn't step in and say, I don't think you should really be using that very recent horrendous massacre in any shape or form for an accountant's exam. Or any other exam, for that matter.
It really, really does. What I've read today is that the exam question was set actually a couple of years ago, but that doesn't excuse it still being used after,
Correct.
Of course, the awful events of October the 7th last year. So clearly, someone should have just said, we can't use this. Now, the exam board, the accountancy exam board today has actually issued what looks to me like a profoundly sensible statement saying, we're sorry, we're going to investigate how this has happened, we're going to make sure it never happens again. So now they're doing the right thing, which is what they should do. But we've got to ask, why, how on earth did that get through in the first place? It just seems totally illogical.
You can't, as we often say, you can't make it up. It's incredibly offensive, and we will see what happens. They've apologised, clarifying the scenario. As you say, it was written 2021, but acknowledged the insensitivity and lack of revision before the exam, and somebody should have been on that, and they clearly weren't. Thank you, Robert Taylor, as ever.